Right, so welcome back to the Elland Road Ramble podcast brought to you by Sports News Blitz, end of season awards edition. I am joined by Ethan today, and we're here to kind of take apart the ending of our season, give out some awards, tell you who we thought was best, worst, bad, ugly, and everything in between. And yeah, we'll crack on. So, season review wise, what would you give that out of 10, Ethan? It's probably a simple answer, but
I mean, yeah, look, it wasn't the perfect season by all means. A lot of ups and downs, but the club came into the season with one aim, and that was to win the title. I think that was pretty vocal. Ampadu stated on many occasions that was the aim, and look, the club's done it. 100 points. So I think it's pretty easy. I think as far as the season is concerned, it has to be a 10 out of 10 from me.
yeah, I don't think there's any disagreement I can make there. I could maybe say, well, if a couple of keeping mistakes we could have had, we could have broken Reading's record maybe, but I don't think I can really complain at title winning 100-point season. You find it difficult to find flaws in a campaign like that.
No, I mean, and look, at the end of the day, prior to the season, if you'd have offered 100 points, a parade, all of it, it's just been absolutely unbelievable. So yeah, just a phenomenal season for Leeds United, and looking forward to what's to come.
Yeah, well, the people who have obviously taken us there's a load of standouts. Who would you say is your player of the season or players of the season?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of candidates. Obviously, I'm sure you'll touch upon quite a few, but Dan James has been phenomenal. I thought Manor Solomon was exceptional for us come crunch time, but for me, it has to be Altanaka. I think in the summer there was a lot of debate about the central midfield position. We had Glenn Kamara leaving, we had Archie Gray leaving, so we needed that void to be filled. And obviously, when we signed Altanaka, there was a few eyebrows raised. Can he cut it at this level coming from the Bundesliga too? But with Gruev and Ampadu going down, there was a lot of raised eyebrows. Two massive players getting injured for us, but ultimately that was the light in our season, because that meant we saw the arrival of Altanaka into the starting 11, and I feel like the way he's adapted to this league, providing offensively as well as everything that he does defensively, he's been outstanding. And yeah, a phenomenal first season for Altanaka, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what he can do going forward for Leeds United.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you on that front. I'd like to obviously give a note to Joe Rodon, a man who had offers to go to the promoted sides to the Premier League, but decided Leeds was the place he wanted to be. He's been an absolute marshal in defence. He's been Mr. Reliable. He's played every game. He's just the leader without being the captain. He's the leader that defence has needed, and the man who is willing to put his body on the line for Leeds United. And after relegation and after how many goals I watched us concede week in, week out at Elland Road, it's been refreshing to see someone willing to put their body on the line, take responsibility in that defence, and kind of give us that stability, even when we had instability behind the defensive line between the sticks.
I'd also like to give a huge shout out to Jayden Bogle as well. Obviously, ever since Ayling, we haven't really had that right back who can both defend to a high standard, but also offensively give us so much. Archie Gray was brilliant for us last year, but at the end of the day, he's not an out-and-out right back. So, to acquire the services of Jayden Bogle from Sheffield United, and then to see what he's gone on to do, over 10 goals and assists, a phenomenal season for Jayden Bogle. And as you mentioned with Joe Rodon, just a stalwart in the team, has played, over 40 games for us this season, Jayden Bogle has. So yeah, a big shout out to Jayden Bogle as well, who probably is in my top 3 for player of the season.
Yeah, I think if I was to give a definitive answer of a player, it probably would be Dan James. I think he was robbed of Championship Player of the Season by Gus Harmer, and he was just a man who kicked on from last season and some Where you could say his end product had suffered in the past, it definitely did not suffer this season, and he was always there. And I feel like the Championship Player of the Season was robbed of either him or Trafford. I have no idea how Gus Hartman took that award away, but it's the only award he's took away this season. So I suppose there's winners and there's losers in that situation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, if we move on to some more underwhelming candidates. Now, obviously, a 100-point season, it's very difficult to find an abundant list of players where they would have been in previous campaigns. But I'm going to initially go away from the obvious French candidate between the sticks, and I am going to put a thing in of Matteo Joseph. Now, not to say he's been dreadful by any standards, but after being chosen to start leading our line at the beginning of the season, I thought he was going to kick on and have a breakthrough campaign. And even though it looked like it could have been at the beginning, he had the goal against Hull, he had the goal against Sheffield United, he just has struggled to nail that spot down. And obviously, it's difficult when you have the league's top scorer to compete with in Joe Perreault, but it felt every time he was in a position, you felt Perreault would have scored it and he didn't. And I think that's the difference of where we'll go in the future and if he will end up making that move to Spain like he was linked with in January, or if he'll end up warming the bench again like Joe Geldhart did for a number of seasons.
Yeah, I completely agree. Obviously, like you said, the obvious candidate is the man in there, Elland Meslier. But going into this, I was going to say the exact same. I had so much, high hopes for Matteo Joseph going into this season. So much so, I even regrettably put a bet on for him to be the top goal scorer in the league. Obviously, that hasn't come to great fruition. But no, I completely agree. I think he had such a phenomenal pre-season. Obviously, that was with the likes of Jorginho Rute. Maybe that has played an impact. But yeah, struggled to nail down a spot at the start. A couple of nice goals. I watched the Hull goal yesterday. The Hull goal, Bristol City goal it was actually. Fantastic goal it was. But yeah, I think we touched on it in the last podcast, really. There's a big decision to be made with Joseph because I feel like this was his time. This was his season to properly, attempt to nail down a spot in the side. Joel Pirro coming off a bit of an underwhelming season. Bamford with his persistent injuries, and he just hasn't taken that opportunity. And I think he's had ample opportunities as well. So look, the club's got a massive decision to make. Do you believe in the potential of Matteo Joseph, or do you sell now while his potential is still there, whilst he's still in the Spain under-21 setup? But yeah, an underwhelming campaign for Matteo Joseph, and it'll be interesting to see what his future lies in the summer.
Yeah, and I think if we go back to our obvious candidate in Elland Meslier, it felt Farke didn't do him many favours by keeping him in the side. I would say post Hull. I think Sunderland happened. We can just go, right, every keeper is going to have a howler in a season. It happens every year for every team. There's always an incident that happens. But I think when he dropped the ball at the feet of João Pedro and you notice the entire defence not like in pure persistent anger, you can tell he's lost the faith of the defence. And once you've lost the faith of the defence, it's only going to go one way. And it felt every time a cross came into the box and he caught the ball, it was the biggest relief in the stadium. And that should not be the case for a keeper who is trying to be part of a title-winning team.
Yeah, look, I think with the thing with Elland Meslier is obviously he has had a lot of good moments for Leeds. When we got promoted, his first season in the Premier League. But like you said, I mean, as a stadium, it shouldn't feel like a huge sigh of relief when our goalkeeper catches the ball. And it also shouldn't feel like when Carl Darlow came into the setup that we're damn near cheering every time he catches a ball as well. An immensely disappointing campaign for Elland Meslier, who came into it. I think a lot of people thought he was going to leave in the summer. But stuck around, a huge part of our leadership setup going into the season. But yeah, definitely, I think that's a position that we need to be 100% targeting in the summer if we have any chance of staying in the Premier League, because it's not only Elland Meslier that like his lack of ability. It's the defence as well. If you've got a goalkeeper behind you who you cannot trust, that will affect your performances. And I think we saw that in the Premier League as well, because there were a lot of times when we defended well. I remember Fulham away, I think it was. And we had a good defensive game. It was 0-0 for a large spell of the game, and an Elland Meslier mistake, and it's just it just kills you. It kills your confidence as a defence. And the last thing you need in the Premier League is to have a defence that doesn't trust their keeper, because we're going to be facing a lot of attacks, and we need the confidence to be at an all-time high. So yeah, likewise with Joseph, I think Elland Meslier's future is going to be very interesting. But yeah, very disappointing season for Elland Meslier.
Yeah, but I think moving on to something more positive, obviously we have a very extensive goal catalogue of this season, close to. It's a shame we couldn't get 100 goals, 100 points, but 95 is a pretty decent total to end on. But what would you say is the pick of the bunch? What is the best one we've scored this season?
I think there's been a fair few. Obviously, the actual Leeds goal this season went to Al Tanaka, but for me, for a lot of different reasons, I will be going with Manor Solomon's goal at home to Preston. The reason for this is obviously it's an amazing strike. It's an outstanding finish from the edge of the box. I also feel like I've been waiting for a goal like that from Manor Solomon for what felt like the entire season. After seeing what he did for Fulham against us. But the sheer importance of it, after beating Middlesbrough and Sheffield United, losing to Millwall, I think it was, going into the weekend, that Preston game felt massive. And Manor Solomon stepped up in true fashion. I feel like that was the day where us Leeds fans kind of knew it was done. Obviously, Sheffield United losing to Plymouth. It's obviously an immense quality strike, but the sheer importance of how that goal turned out to be, for that reason, is why that's my goal of the season.
Back to Gruev just outside, gives it back to Solomon. Solomon with a chance to shoot! Ah, yes! What a finish from Manor Solomon! Absolutely beautiful! What a start, what a goal! Leeds United 1, Preston North End 0.
Yeah, it were an absolute beauty. I was sat watching it at Elland Road, and I could follow the strike in, and you just watch the bend of it go, and it's a sublime finish. And like you say, we've been waiting for that to happen. We got so used to Crescencio Somerville cutting in and doing that as a trademark strike, but we've been waiting for Solomon to do something like that since that FA Cup game in our relegation season.
Yeah.
But I have a slightly biased viewpoint for my pick of the season. Now, like you say, Tanaka's goal at Hull was a beauty. Solomon's goal were a beauty. But just for the sheer pandemonium it caused on the night, I'm going to say Dan James against Middlesbrough in their home fixture, because he missed a similar chance about 2 minutes before where the ball was squared across and he didn't hit it with enough power, and he just went straight into keeper's arms. And you can tell in the commentary by Brinlaw as well, he wasn't making that mistake last time. It's an absolute rifle into the top left corner, and I hadn't seen limbs from the south stand for a long time like that.
Challenge is a good one. Byram, Peru. Now James is in again. Here's Dan James. Oh! Here is Dan James. Absolutely blasts that one into the back of the net. Dan James puts Leeds back in front.
Well, I think with that goal, obviously, I think it kind of sums up the season Dan James has had and how his game has changed completely. He's so much, as you mentioned, obviously he did miss a sitter quite minutes before it, but to see the leaps and bounds he's come on in front of goal it's been brilliant to see. A fantastic nomination by you, and an outstanding goal by Dan James.
I think it's funny how we've also both gone for goals from wingers. And would you say that's an area where we're like, right, we don't need to touch the wingers next season if we bring in Manor Solomon, as we probably should do? Is that an area where we probably don't need to touch in terms of Premier League replacements?
I think it's one of them, and I don't think there's a single position in the squad that you could say like we couldn't improve on going into the Premier League. But yeah, we have some very strong wingers. But not only do we have strong wingers, we have wingers who have been in the Premier League before, and I think that's key. You know, let's say we are to sign Solomon, price dependent. I'd love that. But Nonso, Dan James, Solomon, all have had Premier League experience, and I think that's going to be key going into the new season. I think potentially it depends on how you view the likes of Dan James. Do you think Dan James can step up to the Premier League and be successful? Do you think that Wilfried Nonso can go back to the form, the glimpses of form that he showed in his first stint in the Premier League? So it's just one of them. I think the club will be targeting other positions as priorities. But yeah, I like our wingers, and I think there's a fair few of them that could definitely excel at Premier League level.
Yeah, I think our major problem areas are the typical one we mentioned of goalkeeper. We need someone who we can rely on to deal with barrages of attacks, a la Matt Sells and Mark Flecken, and teams who are going to face a lot of shots, but if they can weather that storm, they have the attacking quality to get the points. But with Junior Firpo's future still up in the air, left back has to be first priority for me. We cannot go into a Premier League season with a makeshift left back in either Sam Byram or Max Verber.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, Junior Firpo's future so up in the air. A lot of links to Spanish clubs like Real Betis. I think Junior Firpo is a weird one. Obviously, he's done many interviews where he got COVID a few times in the Premier League. That very much impacted how much he could offer for us in the Prem, and obviously showcased in the Championship what a great offensive player he can be. But the biggest question mark regarding Junior Firpo is his defensive side, and when you're playing the likes of Mohamed Salah, Bukayo Saka, week in, week out, he's gonna struggle. So yeah, I think left back's definitely a place that we need to look at. I also think the number 10 is also a massive position that we need to be looking at. I think Brendan Aronson has had a solid season. I don't think he's had as bad as a season as maybe a few Leeds fans may have said. But at the end of the day, he's not a Premier League quality player. And I feel like if we are to use a large chunk of our transfer budget, I feel like it has to be in that number 10 position.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there, especially with, you can say Aronson he scored 9 goals this campaign, but if you watch his catalogue, a lot of them are coming from 6 yards out, 5 yards out. And I know you can say you've got to be there in the right place at the right time, but as a number 10, you're not always going to be there. Pablo Hernandez wasn't exactly tapping stuff in from 5 yards out. He was on the edge of the penalty area. So we're looking at someone who can give our wide players the opportunities, can feed Joe Perreault, because I feel like he's a man who needs the chances. It can maybe freeze out of games when he's not getting the ball, but if you get the ball to Perreault in the 18-yard box, he's going to easily at least get a shot on target. And you need that talisman at number 10 to just make things tick. And if we don't get it, I feel like we might struggle attacking-wise in the Premier League, especially if our wide players aren't getting the same amount of space and ball that they would have done in the Championship.
Yeah, and I think moving on to potential players that we could see Leeds United sign, obviously there's been a lot of rumours recently regarding Gustavo Hamer from Sheffield United. Obviously, Sheffield United losing out to Sunderland in the playoff final at the weekend. What are your thoughts on Gustavo Hamer, and do you think he could potentially cut the mustard for Leeds United going into the Premier League?
I'm unsure because, like you say, he was part of a Sheffield United team that was utterly terrible in the Premier League. You can't say anything else. It was a horrendous season, but you could also say Jayden Bogle was part of that defence and then proceeded to have an incredible season for Leeds and feels like he's now renowned with confidence. And I feel like that's the thing. It's confidence players. I feel like Gustavo Hamer is a confidence player. When stuff's going well, he will keep things ticking. But he seems the player that could down tools, could things get incredibly hard and incredibly stressful. As you could see in the running, he wasn't creating as much. Obviously, he had his incredible free kick against Coventry and got an assist in the playoff final. But you're looking at that running where they lost 3 on the bounce. Where is Gustavo Hamer in those games to unlock a defence? And it's all well and good seeing how good players are in the Championship, but it's an entirely new level in the Premier League. And if you have Gustavo Hamer against Rodri, against Ryan Gravenberch, against all like defensively minded players like that, I don't know if he's the one that will make the chances, but I also see him as a man who will be in our price range and will be looking for that step up. And if he's under 15, I would take the risk £1 million wise, but I would not be paying more than what we would have offered previously when he went to Sheffield United.
Yeah, I completely agree. Look, with Gustavo Hamer, I don't think he was the Championship Player of the Season, but that's not to say that he didn't enjoy a fantastic campaign with the Blades. I have also erred on the side of caution with a Gustavo Hamer signing. Obviously, there's no doubt in the ability he has, and I think it's very price dependent. But I think one of the things when you look at Gustavo Hamer is, I think one of the underlying aspects of it is when you actually look at his return in the Premier League with Sheffield United, and it's actually not too bad. Obviously, that Sheffield United team was exceptionally bad, like really, really bad. And Gustavo Hamer did get 10 goals and assists in the Premier League last season, the last time Sheffield United were in that league. So, I mean, look, I don't think he'd be a priority signing, but if you're looking at a player who can be versatile, can play off the left, can play in the 10, he'd be a useful utility man to have. But in terms of, if we want to be staying up and we want to be making marquee signings, maybe move past Hamer, but it'll be an interesting one. I'm looking forward to see how that one develops.
Yeah, I feel like our links to James McAtee initially, he was the man he's going to solve the number 10 issues, and then the price point of 25 to 30 million is a very, very high figure for someone who hasn't had an extended Premier League campaign and has looked well in a poor City side, and you don't know how much of that is either the players he has around him or they merely have not looked the same side. Therefore, these players are going to stand out. But I'll be interested to see who else pops up as a link. As per usual, we are being linked with every single player across Europe within a £35 million price range. So we've just got to see how stuff develops. But I would hope by mid-July we have problem spots covered, so you can have the space for a Rafinha signing, for a Willy Gnonto signing, the player who comes in late in the window, who either can be that utility man off the bench, can provide backup in a spot, and just be the one to maybe plug an extra hole or add an extra bit of depth to a position that may need an extra body.
Yeah, obviously you mentioned McAtee there, and I think likewise with McAtee, a few other players, I think it's key for Leeds to not get priced out in the window, because there are a lot of murmurings. Leeds have new ownership, very wealthy ownership as well. So I mean, teams will be looking at Leeds and potentially trying to price us out for a few players, and I just think it's key that unlike the last ownership, we're just a bit more sensible with the way we go about things, not rushing into things. I think a great example of this was, the second we stayed up on that final day of the season against Brentford, a couple of hours later, Brendan Aronson was all but confirmed. I like the way the 49ers have ran it. You see very few rumours regarding players. So yeah, for me, key points: just avoid being priced out and just take your time with signings. It doesn't matter if they come through the door right this second. Just make sure that they are the right player to guide this team to Premier League safety.
Yeah. And what's your expectations then coming into next season? Obviously, it's difficult to say now without a player signed and without moves being made, but Give me an expectation and a biased prediction of where you feel we can finish.
I mean, look, for me, if we can just stay up, I feel like that would be a phenomenal achievement, given the fact that, in the past 2 Premier League seasons, all of the promoted teams have gone down. However, I do feel like if there is a team that is going to stay up this season, coming up from the Championship, I think it's Leeds. I think we have the best manager out the three. I think we have the best squad. I feel like we play the best football. So look, if we can make a few signings, you never know. I feel like I genuinely feel like we can stay up. I'm not going into this season thinking, we're 100% going to go down. I'm going in with a positive mindset. I think, you look at teams like Wolves who have just lost Mateus Cunha. Can they replace him well? Do they back the manager if they have a poor start to the season? I think there's a huge potential that Leeds can stay up. So my biased prediction, I'm going to go with 17th. I think we've got enough to stay up. I really do, and I think with the addition of a few other players in positions we desperately need to add a bit more depth, I think the boys could do it. But it'd be interesting to see what you think.
Yeah, look, if you offer me 17th at the start of the season, I will take that 100%. But I think the major factor is, especially with the fellow promoted sides, Burnley have immediately had links for Trafford leaving, Egan Riley leaving from the centre of their defence. Joe Bellingham for Sunderland is already in talks with Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany. And Sunderland obviously failed to impress in the latter half of the season and then pulled it out of the bag 3 times in the playoffs with late goals to get it done, which is obviously what you need to do. You just need that moment of strike. But I would be worried for that Sunderland team if players aren't signed, if you witnessed their collapse in the second half of the season. And with Burnley, you have these defensive records, that's all well and good, but it's a different beast in the Premier League. It's all well and good setting up in a defensive shape to stop your top players being Josh Sargent and Borja Sainz. But when you've got Mo Salah running at you, it's a completely different ball game. You're not going to have the same stability as what you had. And in the same with our fashion, we won't be able to play free-flowing attacking football like we would. I don't feel like we'll do what we did under Bielsa and attack everyone. I feel like Farke may be reserved in some manners, especially away from Elland Road. But 17th or just comfortable before the final game of the season, because I do not need Brentford stress again. I don't want a situation where we've had the chances to stay up and it's taken its way all there.
Yeah, I think you raise a fantastic point regarding the clubs who have gone up with us. CJ Egan Riley potentially leaving, a lot of murmurs around Esteve and James Trafford. I also think I saw a very interesting statistic on social media with obviously the likes of Burnley and Sunderland. They've got obligation to buy fees combined between the two teams of pretty much 50 million, which puts a huge dent into potential summer recruits, because that's already a decent chunk of your budget out of the way. Obviously, we saw it firsthand with Helder Costa. We get promoted, Helder Costa joins for 16.5 million. It can alter transfer plans a little bit. So obviously we're going into the season, no obligation to buy players that we might want to buy at that level. So I think for a team coming up, everything is in our favour from a recruitment side of things.
Yeah, that is an incredible point to raise, where Burnley have completed 4 signings off the back, with the likes of Jadon Anthony, Marcus Edwards, Simon Fleming, all becoming permanent fixtures, and then obviously Sunderland with Enzo Lafay. And it's just a case of, where if you've already taken that chunk out, you can't then splash on a big player and then decimate the rest of your budget if you feel like you still have spots to go. But then bargain hunting in the Premier League is incredibly difficult, and sometimes if you look at the relegated teams, you struggle to find players who you would want to keep. and you'd want to have stay at that level, because it felt like, especially Ipswich, it felt like they signed a Championship All-Stars team with the likes of Jack Clark, Sammy Smodics, Greaves in the central of defence, and it's just a case of, usually, especially like when Burnley went down, you had Maxwell Cornet, Ben Mee, James Tarkowski all left immediately, and you thought, yes, they are solid players who will still have commendable Premier League careers, as they have proven to have still careers at the top level. But it's more just a case of, if we don't have these obligations like a Helder Costa, even if we would have liked one, maybe in the case of Manor Solomon, we just need to find the players. We need to find the ones who can do the business, and we need to make sure, especially, that the other two teams are out of our sight. The further away from Burnley and Sunderland come the beginning of the season, the better hope we have of going down, because the Premier League's hard now. If you look at that relegation battle, well, lack of a relegation battle, and your next few teams are Tottenham, West Ham and Man United, there's European pedigree in those squads, and you can't tell who's going to drop out of that bunch. So we are hoping to be the best of the promoted teams and better an established Premier League team. And like you say, with Wolves, if Cooney leaves and a bit of spark comes out of that team, will they struggle? West Ham have struggled in the second half of the season, but have then kicked on right towards the end. And if they still maintain the likes of Jared Bowen in that attack, I don't see them struggling, and I don't see them being roped into a relegation battle. And it's just get the points on the board early, so we're not scrapping for our lives come the end of October.
Yeah, look, it's going to take a monumental effort, and I think it's, unfortunately for us, obviously the Premier League's become such a just ridiculously financially. You know, these teams like Wolves and West Ham, as you mentioned, they're going to be the teams that we're looking at in terms of, you know, can we finish above them? Fulham as well, who were a fantastic side. You've also got a team I thought that were going to be down there next season. You've got Crystal Palace, who have just won the FA Cup, now competing in Europe. I mean, these are the teams that we're competing against. So look, it is going to take a damn near perfect window. But look, we've just got to back the 49ers, and we just got to back Farker and his players to just hope that he can bring Premier League football back to Leeds 12 months from now, pretty much.
Yeah, it's not a case of building anything for the long term yet. We are in the short term and trying to stay up, establishing ourselves and establishing a good core, and keeping this swell of fan support will be integral at maintaining our status. But I am quietly hopeful, but still apprehensive, I think, to put it in a short word.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Could not have put it better myself. I'm very much looking forward to, you know, the challenge of the Premier League, but I'm also very, I'm a bit scared as well. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm very much looking forward to the new season and what it holds.
Yeah. Now, if any of you guys want to leave your predictions for our season in the comments, please do. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much for joining us on the Elland Road Ramble podcast, brought to you by Sports News Blitz. And we'll see you next time.